The rain was supposed to be light, a drizzle at best. Instead, it came down in sheets, turning the bus stop pavement into a mirror of city lights and disappointment. Grace Morgan stood there alone, her hospital scrubs soaked through, her badge still clipped to her pocket like a reminder of a life that had vanished 3 hours earlier. Your position is terminated effective immediately, her supervisor had said. No warning, no apology. Now the storm swallowed her footsteps as she left the building for the last time, feeling like she was leaving behind more than a job, a promise she'd made to herself to help people, to be useful, to matter. Cars sprayed water as they passed, never slowing. She wrapped her arms around herself and started walking, head bowed, the city's heartbeat pulsing around her, unaware that one woman's entire world had just come undone. Before we go any further, pause for a second. Tell me where you're listening from right now. It still amazes Grace and me how a story born in one rainy street might drift all the way to your corner of the world. The storm pushed harder, almost like it was daring her to keep going. Grace's apartment was 6 miles away, and with no paycheck coming next week, she couldn't justify spending the last of her cash on an Uber. So she walked. Every step echoed with the words from earlier: insubordination, budget cuts, not a team player. She had spent 8 years caring for patients who screamed, cried, whispered their last breaths. She had held strangers' hands so their final moments wouldn't feel alone. And when her shift was too busy to eat, she worked through hunger without a word. But today, none of that mattered. One moment, she was a nurse. The next, an empty designation. 2 blocks later, the storm softened. She lifted her eyes and saw something that made her chest warm despite the cold. A diner, yellow neon humming gently through the glass like a small beacon. Inside, a lone man in a hoodie and baseball cap stood at the counter, waiting for a to-go bag. She hesitated, checking her pocket, $2 and a bus pass that no longer mattered. Her stomach gnawed anyway, pushing her forward. When she opened the door, warm air and the smell of frying onions embraced her. The cashier glanced over. "Kitchen's closing soon," she said, tired but not unkind. Grace reached for her last 2 bills, cheeks burning. "Could I maybe just get a hot drink? The cheapest you've got." The cashier opened her mouth to answer, but before she could speak, the hooded man turned quietly and handed her his bag. "Take this," he said. "I got too much. Happens when you order hungry." Grace shook her head. "I can't take." "Already paid for," he smiled. "And I'm already full." She accepted it slowly, fingers brushing the warmth of the bag, a small flame against the storm outside. "Thank you," she whispered, and the stranger just shrugged, tapping his hat in a quiet farewell before walking out into the dark. If you were standing there, watching a stranger hand over his dinner to someone dripping rain and heartbreak, what would you do? Comment your honest answer below. And if words stick in your throat, hit like. Let it be your way of saying kindness still counts. Grace sat on a stool and opened the container. A burger, fries, and a small slice of pie tucked in like a secret gift. The first bite nearly undid her. Not because of the food, but because someone had noticed her without pity, without judgment. The warmth spread through her body, defrosting something inside her that had been frozen long before her supervisor spoke those final words. On the diner's TV, the news hummed. Medical shortages, nurses burned out, emergency rooms overwhelmed. She stared up at it, jaw tight, her mind flickering between exhaustion and anger. How could they say there wasn't room for her when hospitals were breaking? Her phone buzzed then, a text from her best friend, Lily. "Heard what happened. I'm so sorry. Call me when you're safe." Grace typed back, "Walking home. Need space. I'm okay. Promise." She wasn't okay, but she meant to be. She threw away her napkin, wiped rainwater from her face, and pushed the door open. The storm had nearly died, leaving a shimmering world behind, puddles glowing with streetlight reflections. She kept walking, her steps slower now, steadier. And then, about 40 minutes and 3 miles later, the world changed again. A low rumble trembled through the air. Not thunder. Rotors. Grace stopped on the sidewalk, brow furrowing as the sound grew louder and louder, until 2 blinding searchlights cut through the wet night. She shielded her eyes, heart racing. Two helicopters descended toward the field ahead. Emergency search models, loud enough to shake windows. When they touched down, the doors flew open and a voice bellowed over the roar of blades. "Where's the nurse? We need the nurse." Grace froze where she stood, rainwater dripping from her nose, her hair plastered to her neck. For a second, maybe two, her brain couldn't make sense of the sight in front of her. Not after the day she'd had. Not after walking miles with nothing but bitterness swirling inside her. But the command boomed again, louder, urgent, rattling in her spine. "Where's the nurse? We were told a nurse is here." Her first instinct was to step back, blend into the shadows, pretend she heard nothing. She wasn't a nurse anymore, not officially. Just a woman walking home with a cardboard diner bag. But her feet wouldn't move. Instead, something deep inside, muscle, training, instinct pulled her forward. She jogged toward the chain-link fence lining the empty soccer field where the helicopters thrashed the air. Wind whipped her scrubs, and grass bent flat under the assault. Two medics jumped out, scanning the street headlights, squinting through rain. Grace cupped her hands and yelled, "I'm a nurse." Her voice cracked. From fear, from disbelief, from everything. One of the medics spun toward her, eyes widening with relief. "You Grace Morgan?" Her heart stumbled. They knew her name. "Yes," she shouted back, breath catching. I was a nurse." "No," the medic barked, waving her forward. "You were a nurse. Get in." Grace's pulse hammered against her ribs. Every part of her screamed this shouldn't be happening. She'd been fired, erased, forgotten. But she ducked under the fence where they'd cut an opening and sprinted across the muddy field, her shoes sliding as rotor wash assaulted her. The medic grabbed her arm, guiding her toward the nearest chopper. Inside, she saw a man, maybe late 40s, sprawled across the floor, skin gray, lips blue, chest barely rising. A woman clung to him with both hands, sobbing into his shirt. The medic shouted over the engine. "Cardiac arrest in transit. We lost our ER contact. Pilot traced your phone. Emergency flag from your badge registration." Her badge. She hadn't even thought about it. Every nurse had one. A panic registry embedded for major disasters or mass shortages. It meant the hospital didn't delete her from their system. It meant, somewhere, she was still needed. 1,000 emotions collided. Shame, fear, aching exhaustion. But her training swallowed them whole. She dropped to her knees. "Move," she ordered softly to the weeping woman, placing a hand on her shaking shoulder. "It's okay. I've got him." And for the first time in 12 hours, the world made sense again. She checked the man's pulse, faint, thready, slipping away. The medic handed her a bag valve mask, and she positioned it quickly, pressing down, counting breaths, her rhythm steady even as the helicopter rattled from ground vibration. The second medic climbed in behind them. "We need transport now," he yelled to the pilot. The rotors screamed louder as the blades accelerated. The floor trembled beneath Grace's knees. The world narrowed to one man's fragile breaths, his wife's wet sobs, and the relentless rain streaking the windshield. She didn't have gloves. She didn't have a paycheck. She didn't have a workplace to sign her timesheet. But her hands, trembling, determined, knew exactly what to do. Have you ever had someone step in to help you when everyone else walked away? Drop a yes if you have, and tell me their name. Sometimes gratitude needs a voice to keep breathing too. The helicopter lurched upward, slinging all of them toward the sky. City lights streaked beneath them in a smear of gold and asphalt. Wind howled, machinery rattled. Grace kept squeezing the bag. In, out, counting silently, praying with every push that the man's heart was stubborn enough to hold on. The medic beside her slapped pads onto the patient's chest, machine whining as it charged. "Clear," he shouted, and electricity snapped through the cramped cabin. The man's body jolted, the wife gasped, and Grace felt it like the strike had gone through her bones too. Pulse check. Nothing steady. Bag. Pads. Shock. Time folded and stretched. Then, on what felt like the 100th cycle, Grace pressed fingers to the man's neck and felt something. Weak. But there. A pulse, she whispered, so soft the wind tried to swallow it. Then louder, breathless, eyes stinging. He's got a pulse. Relief tore through the cabin. A gasp from the medics, a wail of hope from the wife. And the helicopter shot forward across the sky like it had been waiting for that moment. Grace didn't realize she was crying until her vision blurred, but she kept the mask steady, kept breathing for him until his lungs tried to take over. Minutes later, the city hospital rooftop appeared, its red helipad lights glowing like a welcome she hadn't expected to see again so soon. The doors flung open as they landed, staff rushing forward with a stretcher. Grace followed them onto the platform, her legs unsteady but moving on instinct. The ER doors swallowed the man and his wife, doctors yelling orders, medics clapping her shoulder as they peeled away. And suddenly she was alone under the rooftop lights, wind still roaring, rain misting across her cheeks. And she realized she was shaking, not from cold, but from everything she'd held in all day finally cracking loose. Down below, the hospital entrance glowed warm, familiar, like a place she belonged to even when it tried to cast her out. Before she could decide whether to walk down or disappear into the night, a voice called her name. Grace Morgan. She turned, and the person walking toward her would change everything next. A doctor in a navy scrub jacket approached, his hair whipped sideways by the rotor wash. Even through the storm haze, Grace recognized him. Dr. Samuel Ortiz, the night trauma lead. She'd seen him maybe twice in the years she'd worked there, the kind of surgeon who lived in chaos but rarely visited the general floor. He stopped a foot away, eyes sharp, expression unreadable, then softened. "You saved that man," he said over the dying thump of the helicopter blades. Grace shook her head, feeling overwhelmed, wringing her hands to ground herself. "I just did what anyone would." "No," Dr. Ortiz cut in. "Most people would have walked away." The denial she wanted to give stuck in her throat. Because the truth was, she nearly had. Rain slowed to a drizzle as the helicopter engines finally powered down, leaving the rooftop shivering in sudden quiet. City lights blinked below, car headlights sliding along wet streets, neon signs reflecting off glass windows, the slow pulse of life that had kept moving even while hers had stalled. Dr. Ortiz glanced toward the ER doors. "Come inside. You shouldn't be standing in the rain." "I'm not staff anymore," she murmured, the words tasting bitter. "They terminated me today." His brow tightened, but he didn't look surprised, more like someone who had heard a dozen similar stories in a dozen similar weeks. Hospitals were burning through nurses like paper. "Then maybe someone made a very bad call," he said quietly. "But tonight, I need you." Those three words hit deeper than praise or gratitude. "I need you. Not disposable. Not replaceable. Needed." Grace followed him down the stairwell into the hospital corridor, shoes squelching water. The hall was humming with movement, stretchers rolling, monitors beeping, tired residents rubbing their eyes. Everything smelled like antiseptic and adrenaline. For the first few seconds, she walked invisible, just another set of scrubs. Then a nurse she recognized, Molly from cardiology, stopped short, eyes widening. "Grace? I heard. They said you." Grace lifted a shoulder, as if a shrug could carry the weight. Still processing. Molly stared at her, throat working, then wrapped her in a fierce hug, damp scrubs and all. "I'm glad you're here," she said. "This place has been hanging by threads." When she let go, Grace felt the lack immediately. That warmth, that small human contact she'd been aching for without knowing it. The trauma bay doors hissed open, and the paramedics wheeled the cardiac patient inside. His wife stumbled after him, clutching his jacket to her chest like a lifeline. Doctors circled, calling vitals, ordering labs, positioning 4 lines. Grace hung back instinctively, hands itching to move, muscle memory screaming to jump in. But she was a visitor now, at least on paper. Still, she watched, saw how the man's color slowly crept from gray toward life, how his chest rose more fully with each assisted breath. Hope was written in numbers on monitors and in the trembling shoulders of the woman by his bedside. Grace stood there, so long she forgot she was soaked to the bone. The wife finally noticed her, eyes puffy, cheeks streaked with mascara that the rain hadn't fully washed away. She crossed the few steps between them, voice wobbling. "You saved him." Not a question. A truth layered in gratitude. Grace shook her head gently. "We all did." But the woman clasped her hands tight anyway. "You showed up," she whispered, "when nobody else could." A single tear escaped. Grace didn't know if it belonged to relief or exhaustion. Has someone ever shown up for you at the exact moment you needed them most? Type yes if so. And if you're brave, say their name. Maybe they deserve to be remembered tonight. Dr. Ortiz reappeared, nodding toward a small side hallway. "Walk with me," he said. Grace followed him past storage carts and bulletin boards cluttered with shift notices. They stopped near a back office door where nurses were grabbing coffee, like it was oxygen. He leaned against the wall, arms crossed. "So tell me what really happened." Grace exhaled slowly. "The supervisor said I was insubordinate. I questioned a patient discharge. He wasn't stable, and I pushed too hard." Ortiz snorted, half laugh, half disbelief. "And that's a firing offense now." "Apparently budget cuts made speaking up optional," she murmured. Ortiz's eyes flicked with anger, though his voice stayed calm. "I've seen your notes. You were right more often than wrong." The compliment landed quietly, like someone laying a coat over her shoulders. Undeserved maybe, but warming. He continued, "We're short-staffed everywhere. And frankly," he paused, choosing his words, "we need nurses who care enough to fight." Grace blinked, tired, stunned, unsure she should thank him or break down. Before she found anything to say, alarms blared from the trauma bay, 3 short bursts followed by a longer one. "That's them," Ortiz said. "They're stabilizing. Come see." Her pulse quickened as she followed him back, and what she saw when she stepped inside left her breath catching in her chest. Because the man, the stranger she met only through crisis, was now awake, dazed, eyes fluttering open as his wife kissed his forehead, laughing and sobbing at once. Grace stood motionless in the doorway, lightning cracking somewhere deep inside her. For a long, staggering moment, Grace could only stare. Machines hummed gently, the steady beep of a revived rhythm pulsing through the room like a second heartbeat. The man blinked slowly, turning toward the silhouettes around him, confusion softening into awareness as his wife leaned closer, brushing shaking fingers along his cheek. "You're okay," she whispered, voice cracking. "You're here. You're still here." His lips moved, sounds scraping out like gravel. "What happened?" The wife tried to explain, but the words dissolved into tears and laughter she couldn't control, and the man, though weak, tried to squeeze her hand back. One of the residents caught Grace's eye, nodded to her with a gratitude that didn't need language. Grace remained frozen near the doorway, not because she didn't want to go farther, but because she suddenly felt like she was watching life from outside a window. She'd stood in rooms like this hundreds of times, seen hearts stop, restart, or stubbornly refuse, but tonight it landed differently. Maybe because she'd walked into it as a ghost, jobless, discarded, convinced she didn't matter. And yet here was proof, glowing on the monitor, breathing on the bed, that she did. Dr. Ortiz stepped forward and murmured to the couple, "You'll be monitored through the night, but he's stable. You can stay with him." Then he stepped back and tilted his head toward Grace. "Move with me." She followed quietly down the hallway again until the sounds of machines faded. They ended up in a stairwell this time, where the air hummed slightly from the building's ventilation and the walls were painted the color of tired eggshell. He exhaled slowly. "How long were you going to stand there?" Grace huffed a tiny laugh, until it stopped feeling like a dream. "It's not," he said gently, "and it wasn't luck. You kept him alive." Grace leaned back against the wall, the weight of the night slowly sinking into her muscles. Hours ago, she was walking home like a storm-soaked shadow. Now she'd ridden in a helicopter, rebooted a heart, and stood in a circle of people acting like she belonged. But her badge, the thing that summoned her, had a name under it she technically no longer held. And despite the adrenaline, reality crept back. "I still don't have a job," she whispered. Ortiz didn't rush to fill the silence. didn't soothe her with empty promises. He let the truth sit, heavy but shared. "There's something you need to understand," he finally said. "Hospitals don't run on equipment. They run on people willing to stay when everything's burning." Grace swallowed hard. She knew the burnout stories. Friends collapsing into their cars after 12 hours. Nurses doubling shifts despite fevers. Doctors staying until their hands shook. She'd been one of them. But exhaustion alone hadn't taken her down. It was the moment she stood up for a patient and the institution slammed the door. "Sometimes," Ortiz said quietly, "the ones who are cut loose are the ones who care too loud." Grace blinked away, something prickling at her eyes. He glanced sideways at her, voice lowering. "If I'm being honest, we could fill every open position by morning and still not have enough hands. You being here tonight was an accident. It was necessity." His words settled deep, warm, terrifying. "Now it's your turn. Tell us one small good thing you did today, yesterday, or last week. Write it below so others remember that compassion isn't rare, it's contagious. Your story just might be the spark someone needs to try." Grace pulled herself upright. The storm outside had stopped completely, leaving the stairwell quiet, like the hospital itself was holding its breath. "Why did the hospital fire me then?" she finally asked, raw and small. Ortiz's jaw flexed. "Because sometimes the wrong voices hold the power. But that doesn't mean they'll hold it forever." He pushed open the stairwell door, waited for her to pass through. As they walked back, a nurse hurried up with a clipboard, eyes darting between them. "Dr. Ortiz, ICU needs an admit consult." And she turned to Grace, surprised. "We just got another cardiac alert downstairs. Short staff. Do you?" Grace felt something inside her seize and bloom all at once. Reflex took over before doubt had time to speak. "Yes," she said. "Just tell me where." The nurse grinned, relief brightening her whole face. "Follow me." They jogged down the hallway, shoes squeaking across polished tile. Despite fatigue gnawing at her bones, Grace felt her stride lengthen, felt her spirit rise to meet the moment. A stretcher burst through the ER doors, paramedics pushing, a man in his 70s gasping for air, eyes wild with fear. Grace slipped into place beside the rolling bed, fingers already checking his pulse, her voice steady. "It's okay, sir. You're not alone. We've got you. No badge, no paycheck, just heart and instinct, the only things that mattered here." As they crossed deeper into the emergency bay, Grace felt it hit her. Fired or not, she was a nurse, and the city wasn't done needing her yet. The ER doors slammed behind them, sealing Grace into another whirlwind of motion. The second cardiac patient was pale as parchment, his chest rising and short, uneven pulls like each breath cost him more than he had to give. Paramedics rattled off vitals while Grace guided oxygen over his mouth, adjusting the mask with hands that didn't shake, not even now. He grasped her wrist suddenly, surprisingly strong, his eyes locking onto hers with a raw, frightened clarity. "Don't let me go." Grace leaned closer, her voice firm but warm. "I won't. We're right here. You're safe." His grip loosened, and he sagged back as the stretcher slid through double doors into a curtained bay. Nurses swarmed in behind her, attaching monitors, inserting IVs, calling out numbers like a chorus of urgency. Someone tossed her a set of gloves. She caught them midair and snapped them on automatically. And for a moment, the world felt exactly how it used to be before policies and politics stripped her name from a roster. Dr. Ortiz appeared again, like the storm outside, always moving, and nodded once in approval. "Stay with him," he said. "He's circling the drain." Grace took position at the bedside, watching the tracings of the cardiac monitor. Each spike told a story. Irregular beats, stunned muscle fibers, a heart trying to outrun its own exhaustion. The man wheezed through the mask, his fingers trembling as they reached out again. Grace took his hand gently, anchoring him. "I'm Grace," she said softly. "You just focus on breathing." His eyelids fluttered, a flicker of recognition, of trust. Around them, other nurses called for medication orders and equipment. A crash cart loomed nearby, just in case. The air pulsed thick with tension. Then a shift. The ECG flashed a new rhythm. Not worse, not better, but different enough that the nurse beside her frowned. "Looks like a block developing," she muttered. Grace leaned in, eyes scanning the pattern. She knew that shape, knew what came next if no one intervened. She shouted toward the doorway, "We need pacing pads now." The room jolted into higher gear, and as if hearing her demand stirred fate itself, the new rhythm slipped, faltering. The man's chest hitched. The monitor tone flattened into a terrifying monotone. "No, no," Grace whispered, already moving. Pad slapped onto his chest. The resident called out, "Starting capture." Electricity surged. The man twitched, body stiffening for a second before collapsing back. The beeping returned, weak but there, like a candle spark catching in a storm. Relief rippled across the room, a wave of released breath. Grace stayed at his side, holding the mask, watching color slowly creep back beneath his skin. His grip found her hand again, barely there, but she felt it. "I told you," she said quietly, voice thickening despite her best effort. "You're not going anywhere tonight." When the patient stabilized enough that the team could pivot to long-term care, Dr. Ortiz stepped forward and nodded to her, a flicker of something like pride in his eyes. "Nice work," he said. Again, Grace didn't smile, couldn't, because exhaustion pressed heavy now, trembling through her shoulders, weaving down her spine. But inside her chest, something stubborn glowed brighter. For the second time tonight, she had kept a stranger breathing. For the second time, she mattered. And it hit her, hard, that if she hadn't been walking home, soaking wet, angry and defeated, neither man would have found help fast enough. She didn't know whether to laugh or cry, so she did neither. Just let her heartbeat settle into the new truth forming inside her ribs. If that moment hit you in the heart, if it made something inside you pause, leave a red heart. Sometimes one simple symbol carries everything we feel, but can't quite say aloud. The paramedics finished filling out forms. The residents shifted on their feet, waiting for new orders, and for a breath-long pause, the ER seemed almost calm. Then the automatic doors whooshed open again. A woman staggered in, hair matted, clutching a child in her arms, screaming for help. The ER exploded back to life. Grace didn't wait for permission. She ran. By the time she reached the woman, a nurse had already pulled the small boy onto a stretcher, maybe 6 years old, limp, skin flushed with fever and fear. His eyes fluttered half open, unfocused. "What happened?" Grace asked, kneeling beside them. "He collapsed," the mother sobbed. "He said he was dizzy, then he just went down." A rapid assessment told Grace the boy was dehydrated, burning with fever, pulse fluttering way too fast. Maybe a viral infection, maybe something worse, but she knew the first step. "Get 2 4-lines," she called out, "and a bolus ready." The mother gripped her arm, voice breaking. "Please save him." Grace met her eyes, steady, certain. "I'll do everything I can," she said. And she meant it, with her whole heart. Because fired or not, the universe, the city, fate, whatever someone want to call it, kept sending people who needed her hands, her voice, her presence. And Grace realized with a shiver of awe and exhaustion, maybe she hadn't been pushed out. Maybe she'd been pushed towards something she couldn't see yet. The boy's skin burned under Grace's fingers, fever so high it seemed to hum. His eyelids fluttered, lashes sticking from sweat, and a soft whimper escaped his lips that made Grace's heart clench in her chest. The mother paced at the foot of the stretcher, fingers digging into her own arms, breathing jagged gasps that teetered between panic and collapse. Grace squeezed her hand once, just enough to tell her you're not alone, before turning her focus fully to the child. Fluids began dripping into his veins, cool relief flowing where heat threatened to take over. A nurse pressed a thermometer against his forehead. The number flashed red hot. 104.9, she murmured, eyes widening. Grace nodded, jaw firm. "Let's get antipyretics on board. And keep an eye on his heart rate. He's right on the edge." The ER noise blurred into a kind of thunderous hush, urgency sharpening everything. The lights overhead glared too bright. Metal clattered. Beeps tangled together like a choir of danger. Grace whispered to the unconscious boy, barely aware she was speaking aloud. "Come on, little man. Stay with us." Dehydration, fever, rapid heart. She'd seen this progression before. Sometimes kids bounce back. Sometimes they didn't. She pushed that thought away, refused to let it breathe. Minutes crawled by, each one heavy as stone. The fluids worked slowly. The medicine took longer. But the boy's breathing stayed shallow, ragged, like someone pulled tight strings around his lungs. "Bag him if we lose depth," Grace said to the nurse beside her. "Prep airway backup just in case." The mother suddenly collapsed into a chair, burying her face in her shaking hands. Grace's instinct split two paths: stay with the patient or comfort the mother. She made the only choice she could. She reached out and rested a gentle hand on the woman's shoulder. "He's fighting," she said softly, "and he's not fighting alone." The woman looked up, eyes red, voice desperate. "How are you still here? Aren't you off duty?" Grace swallowed hard. "I wasn't supposed to be here at all." Before the mother could press further, the boy jerked suddenly, his whole body tensing like a string pulled too tight. Grace was back at the bedside instantly. Monitor tone spiked, then flattened, then spiked again. "Seizing?" a nurse asked, already grabbing medication. "No," Grace said, eyes narrowed. "I think he's waking up." And then it happened. The boy gasped sharply, eyelids flying open, pupils huge and glassy under the lights. He coughed hard, like his lungs were clawing their way back online, and choked out a few broken words. "Mom, it hurts." The mother lunged forward with a sob, nearly collapsing again, and Grace steadied both of them, the woman clinging to the boy clinging to breath. "We're helping," Grace whispered. "You're okay. Just breathe." Tears streamed down the mother's face, tears that shook her whole frame. And for the first time since the ER doors blasted open, her shoulders dropped just a fraction. The boy's heart rate settled, no longer sprinting, but still too fast. His temperature blinked downward by tenths, 104.4, then 104.1, a slow descent but one filled with promise. It wasn't victory yet, but it was a step toward it. A nurse leaned close to Grace. "You want to call PEDS?" Grace nodded, and a message was sent down the hall. Minutes later, a pediatric resident hurried in, breathless and wide-eyed. Grace rattled off the rapid history, vitals, meds, response, and stepped back to let them take the lead. Her legs wobbled, adrenaline bleeding away into exhaustion. The room around her slowly turned back into shapes and colors and noise instead of tunnel. The mother grabbed her hand again, clutched it like it was rope over a rushing river. "You saved him," she whispered. "This world doesn't deserve people like you." Grace shook her head, voice hoarse. "I just showed up." But when everyone else was too late, the mother said, tears pooling again, "You showed up." Grace didn't know what to say, because it didn't feel like heroism. It felt like instinct, like breathing, like the thing she was built to do. "Be honest. Could you forgive the people who cast you out, knowing your purpose found you anyway?" Type forgive if yes, or never if your heart wouldn't let go that easily. The boy's eyelids fluttered again, not in pain this time, but in drifting drowsiness. His breathing deepened, steadier, the fever pulling back like a tide, deciding not to swallow him. Grace stood there watching life return, first to the boy, then to his mother's eyes, and something inside her cracked wide open. All night, she had been running toward emergencies that found her without invitation. And each one had whispered the same truth, louder than the last. Fired or not, she belonged here. She didn't notice when Dr. Ortiz appeared beside her, arms crossed, watching with the expression of someone seeing a puzzle piece click into place. "You can sit down before you fall down," he said quietly. Grace blinked, genuinely surprised at how much her body hurt, how much her knees trembled, how her fingertips tingled from overuse. But before she could respond, before she could even take a breath, Ortiz added something that made her heart stop mid-beat. "We're not letting you walk away again." Grace stared at him, the words landing slower than they'd been spoken, like her brain had to unwrap each syllable before it could believe them. "Not letting you walk away again." She opened her mouth, but no sound came out. After a night of adrenaline, panic, heroics, and near miracles, Those words hit harder than any emergency call. "You what?" she managed, voice cracked raw. Ortiz sighed, the long, tired kind that said he'd been carrying something heavy too. "Look around," he murmured, motioning toward the bustling chaos behind them. "This is a skeleton crew on a slow night. We're bleeding staff. And you." He gestured toward the pediatric bay, where the boy now slept under watchful eyes. "You're the reason 3 families aren't grieving tonight." Grace shook her head, backing a half step like she needed space to breathe. "I don't work here," she whispered. "They fired me." Ortiz nodded once, not dismissing, not denying, just acknowledging truth. "They did," he said, "and I'm going to fix it." Grace's heart stuttered. "You can't promise that." "I'm not promising," Ortiz replied, his voice firm, quiet like thunder that knows its power. "I'm doing." Before she could speak again, a voice echoed from behind them. Molly from cardiology, hands on hips, hair frizzed from sweat and rushing. "You better," she said to Ortiz, "because if she walks out that door again, we're all in trouble. And I'll start my shift petitioning HR myself." Grace blinked at her, astonished, moved, but Molly wasn't finished. "Grace is the reason half of us come back every night," she said. "She fights when we're too tired to. She sees patients we forgot to see. Fire her." She scoffed so hard it practically echoed. "They should have promoted her." Grace felt heat rise behind her eyes. Not embarrassment, not shame. Something warmer, deeper, more fragile. "I'm nothing special," she whispered. But Ortiz cut her off gently. "You are. That's the problem." And there, right there, something inside Grace shifted. The anger from earlier, the humiliation, the feeling of being disposable. All of it seemed to loosen its grip on her ribs. Because tonight proved what her badge couldn't. She mattered. Not because a system stamped her name into a schedule, but because when life called, she showed up. Her knees wobbled, and she sank slowly onto a nearby chair, the plastic cold against the fatigue flooding her bones. Her hands trembled, finally allowed the luxury of shaking. One by one, nurses drifted past, some giving her tired smiles, others squeezing her shoulder, all wordlessly confirming what Ortiz had said. She belonged here. Still, a whisper of doubt rose, cautious, haunted. What if HR won't take me back? Her voice was barely audible over distant alarms. Ortiz crouched to meet her eyes. "Then I'll hire you under my license," he said. "And they can fire me too, trying to stop it." Grace let out a sound halfway between a laugh and a sob, because he meant it, and that terrified her almost as much as it healed her. But before emotion could collapse her completely, the pediatric resident approached, offering a small update. "Kid's stable. Fever's dropping. We'll admit for observation, but he's going to be okay." Grace nodded, relief cutting through exhaustion like sunlight splitting cloud. When the resident left, Ortiz stood and offered her a hand. "Come on. You need real clothes, real warmth, and something hotter than rainwater to drink." Grace stared at his hand, at all the hands that had reached for hers tonight. Strangers, co-workers, patients. Then she took it, pulling herself upright. They exited the ER bay and moved into the quiet corridor near the break room. Lights flickered softer there, hum of machinery fading to a tired lull. Molly met them at the door, holding out a blanket and a pair of spare scrubs like a gift. "Locker room's empty," she said. "Go change before you start growing mold." Grace managed a tiny smile, the first natural one in hours. She slipped inside alone, shut the door, and leaned against it, staring at the mirror. Her reflection shocked her. Hair plastered to her skull, shadows deep under her eyes, mascara smeared faintly from rain, hands still trembling. But what struck her most was something she hadn't seen in months. Purpose. She peeled off her wet clothes and slid into fresh scrubs, the cotton soft, warm, almost symbolic, shedding the weight of the night and stepping into herself again. As she tied the drawstring, she whispered to the mirror, not proud, not smug, just certain. "I'm a nurse." And the mirror whispered it back in silence. "You always were." When she walked out, Ortiz and Molly both looked at her, and for once she didn't feel like an outsider trying to earn entry. She felt claimed. If you believe love, purpose, and goodness still rise when life breaks us down, comment, amen. Let's fill this hallway with hope, because someone scrolling right now might need to borrow a little. But the night wasn't over, and Grace could feel it in her bones. She wasn't going home. Not yet. Because one more thing was coming. And this time, it wasn't a patient. It was the people who'd tried to erase her. Grace had barely stepped back in the hallway when she heard it. The sound of dress, shoes, striking tile with clipped intensity. Not a nurse. Not a doctor running to a code. Administrators. Her chest tightened even before she turned. 3 figures rounded the corner. The night supervisor, the HR manager, and her former unit chief. The same one who'd fired her 12 hours ago. The sight of him made something cold crawl up her spine. His face went slack when he saw her standing in fresh scrubs. "You," he sputtered, as if she had no right to be visible anymore. "What are you doing here?" Grace opened her mouth, but Ortiz stepped forward like a shield. She saved 2 cardiac arrest patients and stabilized a child on the verge of heat stroke, he said calmly. "And that's just what I personally witnessed." The chief stiffened, but Ortiz wasn't done. "You fired a nurse who is more valuable than half the department combined," he said. "And tonight proved it." The HR manager cleared her throat. "Well, the termination paperwork will be rescinded," Ortiz said. Immediately, the night's supervisor, a woman whose eyes darted anxiously between all 3, murmured, "We do have the authority to reverse." "No," the chief snapped. "This is a breach of policy." She was terminated. She is not permitted on hospital grounds, let alone. She was flagged by emergency routing. Ortiz cut in. She responded to a public safety alert the way any registered nurse is trained to. "You want to sue her for saving lives." The hallway went dead silent. A handful of nurses had drifted closer, word traveling faster than gossip, watching from behind med carts and computer stations. Not speaking, just witnessing. Grace stood in the center, feeling every heartbeat. The chief's face twisted. "You undermine my authority," he hissed at Ortiz. Ortiz didn't flinch. "If your authority fires nurses for protecting patients, then your authority is a liability." "That's enough." "No," Ortiz said, voice steady steel. "I'm finished watching good people be punished for caring." The chief opened his mouth, but then Molly stepped up beside Grace, arms crossed. "We're all finished," she said simply. Another nurse joined her. Then a paramedic. Then 2 residents. Silent, shoulder to shoulder. A wall of witnesses. Something flickered in the chief's eyes. Not fear, but realization. A man who suddenly understood he wasn't the most powerful person in the hallway anymore. He exhaled sharply and turned to HR. "Fine. Reinstate her." Grace swallowed hard, but he wasn't finished. "In fact," he muttered bitterly, "put her back on schedule, starting tomorrow." Ortiz raised a brow. "No." The chief glared. "What now?" "She starts tonight," Ortiz said. "Because she never stopped." A ripple of smiles, tired, triumphant, passed down the small crowd. The chief threw up his hands and stormed away, ego bruised and helpless in the face of truth. HR followed reluctantly, the night supervisor trailing behind, whispering something like "thank you" under her breath as she passed Grace. When they were gone, the nurses all exhaled, the kind of breath held too long. Molly bumped her shoulder lightly. "Told you we had your back." Grace blinked through tears she could no longer stop. Some broke free and slid warm against her cheeks. Not from sorrow, not from exhaustion, from belonging. Dr. Ortiz touched her arm. "Go home if you want. Stay if you want. But know this." His voice softened. "You are exactly where you're meant to be." Grace nodded once, small, certain. She looked toward the ER, bustling, chaotic, alive, and smiled through trembling lips. "I'll finish the shift," she whispered. Molly groaned dramatically. "Knew we'd never get rid of you." Grace laughed, a sound full and bright, born from a place she thought she'd lost. She moved back toward the nurse's station, the hum of monitors and the rhythm of footsteps pulling her along like a heartbeat she'd finally found her way back to. And in that moment, walking into the storm of human need, she felt no fear, no bitterness. Only purpose, only home. If this story found your heart tonight, don't let it vanish quietly. Tap like, "Not for me," but for the woman who kept showing up, even after the world told her she wasn't needed. One click and whisper, "I felt you. I see you. I believe in you." Hours later, just before dawn, Grace finally stepped outside. The storm had passed completely. The city glowed gold under first light. Streets washed clean, air crisp with new beginning. She pulled in a deep breath, lungs filling the way her soul had earlier, and started walking home. Not broken, not lost. A nurse. Always a nurse. Whether anyone gave her a badge or not. And the moral washed through her gently, like sunrise warming skin. Some doors close not to shut you out, but to push you toward the ones that know your worth. Sometimes, being fired is just destiny lighting a brighter path. And Grace, soaked, exhausted, undefeated, finally knew her road forward. She wasn't walking away anymore. She was walking toward everything.